I invite you to come and sit for a spell. The summer breeze has a story to tell about a time at the end of June when the crickets hum a bewitching tune. The summer solstice is on its way, the shortest night and the longest day. A time for tea or wine outdoors, on shady porches or sandy shores, for candlelit dinners in the open air and humid breezes frizzing up your hair. The magic of the moment comes when birds sing and crickets hum. The magic is in everything, and the simple moments life will bring. The sun patch that delights the cat, your favorite sundress or old straw hat. The magic is in the patch of daisies, and having permission to just be lazy. The solstice is a time of rest, when Earth is offering up her best. When desired feelings become habitual, that's the strongest but simplest ritual. Now's the time to relax and receive, and trust that's all you need to achieve. The elements are calling your name, so join them for this little game. Take pleasure in the simple things and see what magic summer brings. Greetings, magical mavens, and welcome to this Litha/Summer Solstice bucket list. So if you're new around here on this channel, I like to look at the wheel of the year not as 8 individual holidays, but as 8 seasons that are each 6 weeks long. This liberates us from this concept that we have to do all the magical things on one day, or even just one weekend or 1 week. And it also gives us permission to make our whole lives every single day feel magical by tapping into and embracing the themes of each season in our everyday lives. The summer solstice, aka Litha or midsummer, is the longest day and the shortest night of the year. Celebrated around June 21st, the summer solstice marks the end of the spring and the beginning of the summer season. It's called midsummer because astronomically, it's the middle point of the half of the year when the days are longer than the nights. Interestingly though, even though the sun is out for the longest amount of time this week, in many parts of the Northern Hemisphere, including here in New York, the weather is only just starting to feel like true summer. The days will begin to grow shorter after this checkpoint. Therefore, it has the vibe of a high energy celebration while also having a bittersweet undertone. It's a time to relax and be very present in the moment and to give oneself permission to relax. The energy of nature is nearing its peak of life force energy before the heat starts to dry everything out. For many of us, the weather is at its most comfortable this time of year, not too hot or too cold. It's time to cherish the moment and relax into the nurturing energy of nature, to simply be. So, being the writing witch, of course, tip number 1 is to do your seasonal journaling. I have 3 favorite themes that I like to focus on for each of the 8 Sabbats, and I always do some journaling around those subjects to help me tap into those themes and embody them and really step into my next level version of myself by working with the energies that are naturally going on in the season at hand. The 3 themes I like to focus on most this time of year are the present moment, the inner child, and something I like to call tween times. So I'm gonna just be a little bit mysterious and not explain at all what any of those things mean, and just promise you that it is really interesting and worth a watch after this video. So for a much deeper dive on these themes and how to incorporate them into both the magical and the mundane aspects of your life this season to experience more joy and fulfillment, I invite you to check out the video I did last year, which will pop up on your screen at the end of this video. And of course, you're also invited to join me and my witchy community of magical mavens over on Patreon, where we're currently doing our early summer seasonal living challenge to support each other in embodying these themes in whatever ways are most empowering for each of us as individuals. Your membership, of course, also includes access to my lovely information sheets and journal prompt pages that I've designed for the season. The next tip is to pick some wildflowers or get some potted flowers. Now, I know this is one of those seemingly generic traditions that literally everyone and their mom has mentioned in their How to Celebrate Litha videos and blog posts, but it's like that for a reason. Unless you're someone who buys yourself fresh bouquets or receives them from someone in your life all the time, or someone who picks wildflowers frequently for a work project while on walks with their dog, like my sister does, chances are you don't get to experience the fleeting magic of fresh flowers very often. Even those of us who garden or keep houseplants know that most flowering plants aren't in bloom most of the time, and we must soak up their beauty for the short time that they are. This ties into the journal prompt in our seasonal living challenge on Patreon about the magic of the moment. One of the biggest themes of the summer solstice is that it's a transient moment between the sun's waxing phase and its waning phase. Even though it's easy to look ahead at the remaining warm days and forget that summer doesn't last forever, this Sabbat is here to remind us that the days are actually about to start growing shorter and shorter again right after the sun moves into the zodiac sign of Leo, which happens on the summer solstice or on the 22nd of June. In the practice of mindfulness meditation, it's often recommended to make a ritual of staring at a fresh flower, contemplating or simply appreciating its temporary beauty, knowing that everything in nature, including us, has its inevitable phases. It reminds us that all we ever really have is the present moment, and it's up to us to slow down and receive the gift of the present moment. This tradition has looked different for me each year, and it's created a chain of memories that allows me to reflect on the various stages of my own life thus far, appreciating each one for what it's been, even with what I perceived as imperfections at the time. When I was a teenager, I used to live in walking distance of a little park filled with wooded walking trails with a clearing in the middle atop a steep, grassy hill. And on this hill, lots of beautiful wildflowers grew. And when I moved back to that neighborhood briefly in my 20s, I noticed that the summer solstice was the time when that hill was most covered with wildflowers. So I gathered some and placed them on my altar, and a tradition was born. In the past few years, however, I haven't lived near to a wooded or wild area, and I've really missed that. So now it's even more precious to me when I get to visit those more natural areas, and I sometimes make an extra special trip just to make sure I get to pick wildflowers somewhere this time of year. And inevitably, I know that someday I'll have a house and a yard that's full of wildflowers, and it'll seem absolutely normal to me to be surrounded by them. But even then, I'll have that deeply rooted appreciation for that experience, having cultivated this value even when it wasn't as accessible. I also have a lovely memory involving summer wildflowers from a time just a few years ago when I had gotten this idea in my head that I wanted to try manifesting this specific thing, receiving flowers from my partner. And as it often goes with those of us who are non-specific manifestors via our human design, it did not end up happening. No shade to my partner, he actually gifted me with lots of beautiful things during that time that were technically above and beyond flowers, but he just didn't get the hint about the flowers for some reason, probably because I was learning a lesson about manifestation there. Anyway, one of my favorite girlfriends ended up visiting me, and she happened to be a smoker at the time. And since cigarettes are not allowed on the patios here, we walked across the street to what's now another apartment complex, but at the time was a lovely vacant field that happened to be full of wildflowers that day. My friend picked a handful of them while we chatted, and I figured she was planning to take them home, but to my surprise, when we got back to my apartment, she put them in water and said they were for me. And this ended up being just one of many signs I received involving flowers, all of which seemed to be pointing me toward the concept of valuing my female friendships just as much as any romantic relationship. And just as with all things of this notion of valuing the present moment, it turned out that that vacant lot would be gone the following year. As would the habit of getting to hang out with that friend all the time and just do nothing in the middle of a random day, because she ended up getting married and giving birth to twins. And while I had appreciated that vacant lot in passing when it happened to be in bloom, I had kind of taken it for granted and hadn't even really thought to go and look closely to see what kind of wildflowers were in there until my friend happened to steer me over there that day. And now that there are no more open green spaces to be seen out my window, it's just yet another reminder to stop and smell the roses whenever we can. The next tip is to make a flower crown of some kind. This one is made out of fake stuff, but you could make it out of real ones and just have it be one of those magic of the moment things where part of the beauty of it is that it won't last forever. Or if you want it to last a lot longer and you do want to use natural materials, you can use dried flowers. So I did make a video years and years ago on how to make one of these using Dollar Tree items, but that was way before I really knew how to make a great YouTube video. So if you would be interested in an updated tutorial, I invite you to leave a comment letting me know, and maybe we'll be able to fit it in later this season or in one of the seasons ahead, because I actually have a seasonal headband that I've made for all 4 seasons. Stay tuned for the rest of the videos in this series where you will observe me wearing them. The next tip is, of course, to decorate an altar or decorate your entire space. If you've seen any of my videos, you know that decorating is one of the biggest ways that I personally like to celebrate the seasons. Personally, I like to go all out with an altar setup, an elaborate tablescape, and these 2 Sabbat-themed Christmas trees that I update every 6 weeks. But if you're in the broom closet or just don't have the time or desire to decorate your whole space, even doing something as simple as putting out a different wreath on the door or getting a seasonal bouquet of flowers like we talked about is enough to give you the psychological trigger that the season has changed, and it's something to rejoice in and savor for the short time that this chapter of your life is here. It's a way of romanticizing your life and celebrating where you are in the journey of life in a playful and beautiful way. And of course, if you enjoy getting crafty, you can always make your own seasonal wreath, either with fake or dried flowers to use year after year, or you can harness some of that magic of the moment energy that we talked about and use fresh flowers, herbs, and greenery to savor for the short time while it lasts. I happen to really love making wreaths of both kinds, and this year I finally decided to start selling some of my Witchy seasonal wreaths in my home decor shop. Obviously, the ones that are meant to last year after year. So if you're not planning to make one yourself, but you would like to have a beautiful circlet of foliage crafted with love from your fellow witch, I invite you to check out my selection. Each one is one of a kind and made with positive intention for your peace, fulfillment, and abundance this season and every season. The next tip is to eat outdoors. I don't know about you, but for me, there is something so magical about enjoying a drink, snack, or full-on meal outside in the elements. For me, this personally dates back to the very, very beginning of my spiritual journey when I was recovering from depression and an eating disorder that I now know had stemmed from a feeling of being out of place in the universe. When I started prioritizing my physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health, I quickly realized that being in quiet spaces outdoors as often as possible was one of the most accessible tools I had to help keep myself feeling at peace and connected to nature. Sometimes it looks like preparing a beautiful meal out of fresh fruits and vegetables and setting up a lovely outdoor picnic for myself in my yard, or packing a meal to eat on a hiking trip with a loved one. Other times, it just looked like hiding in the tiny green patch behind where I worked at the time to have a quick lunch in the sunshine between whatever madness was going on at work. Whatever it looks like for you, I invite you to have something to eat or drink outside and see how it makes you feel. This is something I'm challenging myself to do more too, because I originally got this apartment with the intention of spending a lot more of my meal breaks out on the patio. And even though thankfully I no longer have an eating disorder and I have a really great relationship with food now, which I must say is due in huge part to working with the Wheel of the Year, doing my seasonal journal prompts that are now part of the Seasonal Living Challenge, and understanding the plant tend harvest compost cycle that I fit into as part of nature, I still am very just energetically sensitive, especially to pollution and noise, as I'm really realizing. And so in order for me to eat comfortably, I kind of need to create a little bit of a safe space for myself. And what I hadn't realized until I moved into this apartment is just how loud and obnoxious the traffic would be. And especially now that there are even more noisy neighbors crammed into this area than there were when I first moved in, I've admittedly had a hard time feeling tranquil in what was supposed to be my little garden sanctuary. But just as we've been talking about throughout this video, I recognize the importance of accepting and appreciating the present moment despite its imperfections. So I'm choosing to lean into my magical tools, like my noise-canceling headphones, Yep, I'm an air sign, and I recognize that technology is also magic. So I'm using both magical and mundane tools to curate my day-to-day experience with things like recorded nature sounds and filling my porch with as many plants and magical objects as possible, using my witchy ingenuity to create my desired reality with whatever form the elements are currently taking in my life, because that's what Alchemy of Affluence is all about. By the way, if you're watching this on YouTube, you may not be aware that the informational videos like this one on this channel are also shared in audio form on all podcasting platforms. And it's called the Alchemy of Affluence podcast, hence that reference there. And there's also years worth of other great episodes that aren't posted here on YouTube as videos. So if you're also someone who enjoys listening on the go, I invite you to subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to listen. And if you could leave a positive review for me while you're there, that would be so helpful in getting this information discovered by a larger audience and helping your girl get paid. So thank you in advance for that, and thank you so much even if you're just subscribed here on YouTube. I appreciate you so much. The next tip is to do some kind of garden update documentation or simply documenting what the nature around your home looks like this time of the year. As a gardening enthusiast, I like to take a picture and video of what my garden is looking like at each of the 8 seasonal checkpoints on the Wheel of the Year. And this year, my goal is to get even better with my documentation as a gardener and actually do some more in-depth journaling about what I've learned up until that point, how my plants are doing, and things that will help me become a better gardener going forward and to develop more green witch traditions. But even if you don't have a garden, it's still a great practice to just take note of what nature is doing in your environment and making a little tradition or ritual out of commemorating it in some way. This can again look like picking wildflowers and photographing them for your Instagram, or pressing them to later frame or use in your grimoire, journal, or book of shadows. You can actually journal about what nature looks and feels like right now, maybe even in the form of poetry. That's exactly how I created the poem that you heard at the beginning of this video, which you can also grab as a printable download on my shop. You can draw something that inspires you about your environment. You can use the local gifts of nature on your altar or in your spells and rituals. It's also a great time of year to make an altar outdoors if you can. This can be a semi-permanent altar that's in your own garden, or it can just be a temporary mandala made from the foliage you find in the woods that you leave out in nature as an offering to maybe any spirits that you work with, or just as a fun thing for other hikers to find. One thing I did years ago was collect little bits and bobs from nature during each of the seasons and put them each in their own jars. Then I could return to the contents of those jars 6 months later at the opposite Sabbat to ritualistically balance my energy by calling back on the magic of the opposite season. The possibilities are endless. Now, my favorite movie to watch this time of year is Practical Magic. And again, just like I said in the last video on May's Eve when I mentioned the movie The Craft, this is another one of those movies that most people say is one of their favorite Halloween movies. And this one makes a little bit more sense for Halloween since there is a Halloween scene at the very end of the movie. But actually the majority of the movie takes place around the summer solstice. And you'll recall that when all the craziness goes down, the aunts and the little girls are at a summer solstice festival. It makes me think of things like potted rosemary by the front door, taking walks at the waterfront, tending to the garden, wearing flowy maxi skirts and spaghetti strap tops and straw hats with the wind in my hair. It was around the summer solstice last year that I got inspired to paint this plaque with the quote from Practical Magic that says, "Keep rosemary by your garden gate, plant lavender for luck, and fall in love whenever you can." I even learned how to age and whitewash wood to create this plaque, inspired by how they painted the entire little town white in order to film that movie. So recently my partner told me that he really likes this piece of wall art and he thinks that I should make more of them to sell in my shop. I haven't done so yet because it was actually kind of a lot of work, but if you guys really like it and think it's something that you would actually buy, please do let me know. I would be happy to make more of these and come up with a system so that it's a little bit easier for me to crank these out as opposed to it just being a super experimental one-time art piece, if I know in advance that it will actually be loved as much as I love mine. So I invite you to leave a comment letting me know what you think. Now, this is more of a weird one, but if you are looking for a more obscure summer solstice movie, there's also The Love Witch. It's a really bizarre horror film about an emotionally insecure witch who does poorly planned love spells on unsuspecting men. And while I'm not normally much of a horror person, especially the ones that are about witches because I feel like it gives us a bad name, I actually love the whole aesthetic of this movie, from the 60s style visuals and music to the old school Wiccan inspired rituals to the Baroque and Elizabethan songs used in some of the more artsy scenes in the film. It's hard to describe unless you just see it for yourself, so I will try to leave a link below of where you can stream this movie if you're curious. But my favorite part is the Summer Solstice Festival, which now has me adding Elizabethan ballads to my Summer Solstice playlist. It fits perfectly with one of my favorite midsummer traditions, which is seeing Shakespeare in the park. In my city, the first performance is always on the summer solstice, and it's a time to congregate on a grassy hill with a wooded area and a lake behind the set, having cheese and fruit and wine, and watching a great classic play as the sun sets. It's a perfect, timeless, secular way of celebrating midsummer out in the open, in a historical way. And it's even more perfect when they happen to be performing A Midsummer Night's Dream. And of course, whether or not you're able to see a live performance, this is also the perfect time to find a recorded performance or a film adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream, which I always think of as one of Shakespeare's most pagan plays. And I know a lot of people also like some movie called Midsummer that is also a recent horror movie from a few years ago. I have not seen it and I kind of don't want to see it because, funny story, when I was doing keyword research for last year's Midsummer video, my partner walked in and was like, "Whoa, why are you looking up Midsummer? That is a terrifying movie that you would absolutely hate." And I told him I had heard of it, but again, had no interest in watching it, and I kind of had to explain to him that midsummer is another word that we pagans use to describe the summer solstice, and it's kind of weird and bizarre and a little bit annoying to me that a lot of the times when people first hear some of the terms and concepts of paganism, it is in the form of horror movies. But if you guys like that movie, no shade whatsoever. I'm actually thinking about it and I'm realizing that a lot of my favorite witchy movies are technically horror movies, even though I don't see them as scary. So like The Love Witch, not scary at all, but it's a horror movie. Even Practical Magic and The Craft are technically considered horror movies, even though they're not scary, at least not to me. But what do you guys think? Let me know what you think of pagan horror movies and what your favorite witchy and pagan movies are, especially for this time of year, because I'm always looking for new ideas. The next tip is a fun one, and that is to make and or just drink some kind of summer wine or mead. So mead is a wine made from honey that's most known now as what was historically drank during this time of year in European cultures during the Viking times, for example. But it was also used all over the world, going much farther back into history. So many pagans like to drink or even make their own mead during the seasons when honey is being produced by the bees in nature, as a way to connect to our pagan ancestors and to nature in general. Honey and bees and wine were all considered sacred throughout history in many cultures, and mead is a celebration of the abundance of the earth and sun and plants and animals and humans alike, since all of those interconnected things go into making this fascinating drink. I think I had tried mead for the first time many years ago when my college boyfriend bought some, but I actually hadn't had it again until last midsummer. I had learned about it in some of my witchy seasonal studies, and I wanted to remember how it tasted tasted and see if it was something I might want to incorporate into my traditions. And even though mead was quite prevalent in history, it's apparently nowhere near as popular now because there was literally only one brand of mead at the huge liquor store in my city. But luckily I was able to find it and it was lovely. And yes, I do intend to make a tradition out of it. So in addition to purchasing it again, I'm also planning to learn how to make my own, hopefully using local honey. So I'll be sure to share that with you guys when I do. The next idea is to make a nature terrarium. So this is kind of a spin on the tip about documenting nature, but this is something that can actually have the potential to live on indefinitely rather than dying and drying up, like cut flowers, for example. This is something I started doing a few years ago after a really cold, snowy winter when I desperately missed the greenery of summertime. I thought if I could only just see and smell that damp, lively forest floor somehow, by saving a little piece of it in a bottle, that would help me feel more grounded and at peace when the world outside is frozen with no end in sight. So that summer, I learned how to make moss terrariums. It did take a bit of trial and error to see which kinds of plants and mosses would live well in a jar and how to make sure it's getting the resources it needs, but it's actually pretty easy once you get into it. If you set it up correctly and put it in the right location, it will completely take care of itself with basically zero maintenance. In fact, the terrariums that I have right now have been living pretty much maintenance-free for years now. All you need to do is put some rocks on the floor of a clear glass jar and then layer a little bit of soil on top and place some moss inside. Water it a little bit, preferably with a spray bottle so that you don't overdo it, because this thing is really never going to need to be watered. I think I put a tiny splash of water in mine a couple of times a year, just because mine are not sealed tightly, and so I think a little bit of the water evaporates over time. But essentially, the water will create its own ecosystem, where it creates mist that goes to the roof, and then that sort of trickles back down, and then it goes into the soil, and the cycle repeats itself. It's really cool. There are some more specific methods that can supposedly help you prevent things like mildew and just make sure that it works a little bit better, including using things like mesh in between of the rocks and the soil and activated charcoal. So you can look that up online if you want to get really into it, but I have discovered that sometimes it works perfectly fine without those things. Mine includes a houseplant that was drying out too much before I enclosed it into the jar, and even though it hasn't grown much over the years, it's clearly alive and well. One thing I had to learn is that the terrariums needed more light than I had originally thought. Even though the forest floor seems like a shady area, the moss down there actually gets a lot more light there than can easily be found in a seemingly bright corner of my home. So I had to keep mine either directly in the window or under a grow lamp. Since I wanted mine to be somewhere where I could easily see it every day, I put it on my headboard and screwed a good quality grow light bulb into the lamp directly above it. And yes, every once in a while I do stick my nose in there in the dead of winter, and it does smell just like the forest floor. You can even create rock formations or stick figurines in them to create a tranquil nature scene, or even use it as a mini shrine or altar. The next tip is to find a body of water to hang out at. The summer solstice is actually the official start of Cancer season on the zodiac wheel. Cancer is a water sign that deals with the more cozy, luxurious aspects of the water element. So along with things like watering the garden and decorating my home with a watery theme, one of my favorite ways to honor the water element this time of year is to spend time in or near water. There's something about being near a natural body of water that feels so energizing and magical to me. So I always make sure to get out to the waterfront when the weather is nice enough for it, and as I mentioned in the Beltane/Maze Eve video in this series, I'm not as much one for actually swimming in natural bodies of water, but if that's your thing, this is the perfect time to make that happen. As for me, I prefer walking near the water, or maybe just sticking my feet and my legs in, or being in a boat or kayak. And even though I unfortunately can't do this in my current living situation, I used to love taking a bath with fresh flowers in the water that maybe even I had picked in a sunny bathroom during golden hour. Sadly, there are no windows in my bathroom here, but if you can be submerged in water with the sunlight on your naked body, I highly recommend it. I don't know why, but for some reason, it just makes me feel like a fairy or a goddess or a mermaid or something. It's great for bathing rituals or just for relaxing and soaking up the good vibes. So to dive even deeper into these three themes that I like to focus on this time of year, I invite you to check out this video from last year, where I not only gave you my favorite journal prompts and explained how to work with them to embrace your most magical life this time of year, but I also responded to the journal prompts in the video to actually show you what it looks like to embody these themes with whatever you're going through in your real life. So I invite you to check that one out, and I will see you over there.